and welcome to a special edition of Big Deal, in which we are going to put the spotlight on some of the upcoming legal hot topics of discussion. Now, we will focus on dispute resolution and innovations on that front. Also remember, technology is gaining importance in all sectors, including the legal sector as well. So how disruptive is that going to be? To discuss that, I have a panel of high-profile legal experts, not just from India, but across the world, to give us the right perspective. Let me introduce first Cyril Shroff, our own from Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas. I also have with me Justin North, who's visiting from London. Noah Weisberg, he's coming in from Toronto, and joining us from the London studio is Rosemary Yuano. Thank you so much, lady as well as gentlemen, for joining us right here on CNBC TV 18. First, let me take it straight to Cyril Shroff. Now, you are taking this huge initiative at this point on talking about innovations in the legal system and also on dispute resolution. Why at this time? What is the significance of this?
So thanks, Nisha, for hosting this show and for focusing on this topic. I think the two themes over here, innovation and then innovation and dispute resolution. The Indian legal industry and the Indian legal market is absolutely ripe for disruption and for innovation. And this theme has been building up over time. And I think it's coming to an inflection point where now it sort of needs to go to the next level with innovation on various fronts, whether it's process, whether it's the manner in which service is delivered, and of course, with the better usage of technology. That being said, I think there is a broad range of topics, and we're going to discuss on this panel as well, including on dispute resolution, the impact of third-party funding. So it's as India's economy sort of goes to the next level, we aim to become a $20 trillion economy in less than a decade. Now, that's not going to happen unless the legal system and the conflict resolution system also goes to the next level. So, and the legal system, if it stays behind in a different era, it's going to be a hurdle. So, I think this is as good a time as any, but it's probably overdue. And hence, as Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, we have decided to take a big leap on this, both in terms of looking at taking a fresh look at dispute resolution, as well as the impact of how we're going to use technology to improve services to our clients and just become more efficient. And we have a fantastic group of panelists on this. So that's my sort of initial comment.
So let me get started also on the technology front first with Justin. How do you think the global scenario is developing when it comes to the legal system and the usage of technology, and where are we as Indians pitted against the global peers?
The first thing to say is I think that jurisdictions like the UK, also the Asia-Pacific regions, particularly Australia, have been making significant progress in the use of legal tech for a number of years. Over the last 2 decades, automation has been something that's been embedded within a number of leading law firms. I think what's happened in those jurisdictions now is that there's this perfect storm of support from law societies, support from the judiciary, from the regulators, from the firms, but also from the clients. Even from the point of view of the legal educators as well. So the law schools themselves are now getting involved. And so that's pushing them forward. In relation to this market, there's significant appetite and huge potential here to even leap a few generations. I think what is exciting for us down here at the moment is the depth of talent that the Indian market has in the STEM areas, the science, the technology, engineering and maths, and mashing that together with what's possible in the law. That's where I think the Indian market is going to get to quite rapidly and potentially catch up quite quickly.
Right. So you're talking about innovation in technology, but innovation in products and the ways in which the various legal systems are developing is also very, very important. So let me get in Rosemary in this discussion. Rosemary, litigation funding is a new product for us. You take the lead in this. Give us an insight on the benefits of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Litigation funding is a well-established tool in other global dispute resolution centres around the world. At its core, litigation funding enables claimants in disputes to mitigate their cost risk. The funder pays for all of the costs of the disputes, including any legal fees, disbursements and court costs, meaning that the claimants don't have to. So what the litigation funding is doing is enabling claims to be brought that otherwise may not be. The only exposure the claimants may have to any costs if their claim is funded is if there is an eventual damages recovery from which the funder would seek a return on their investment and the initial investment they have made. If the claim loses, the funder will have been paid for all of the costs of the claim and the claimant would have no cost, risk or exposure to bear. That really changes the picture when one comes to talk about litigation and dispute resolution, and the factors that claimants have to bear in mind when thinking about bringing claims. They purely now need to think about the strategic considerations and the substantive law in bringing the claim, putting the cost considerations, which are often such a fundamental part of their decision-making process, onto the shoulders of the funder.
Right. So this, Cyril, help us understand. We don't see this in India, but there are enough disputes. Is it legal here?
So India is one of the biggest disputes markets in the world, but this product hasn't arrived here. There's a popular misconception that it's not legal in India, and that's completely untrue, because what is prohibited is litigation funding by lawyers. What is not prohibited is third-party litigation funding, like the funding that is provided by Rosemary's firm, Vanin. And even our law has been, our civil procedure code has been amended in many states to allow it. I think the Supreme Court has recognized it as well in at least twice. It's recognized in arbitration as well. So I think we're going to see this. And there have actually been some small beginnings that have been made by some crowdfunding outfits as well. So I think it's already here, let's say below the radar. I think you will see it more mainstream soon as this conversation picks up.
Have we had any example of remittance by way of legal litigation funding?
You touch a very important point. I think it's the Foreign Exchange Management Act issue, for particularly for its offshore funding into India for litigation, that there is some gray around it. But it's possible to use for cross-border arbitrations, and there are still many uses of it. So it's the beginning of a journey, so we shouldn't sort of judge it too quickly.
All right. So, Rosemary, help us understand. Have you also tried to test the Indian waters when it comes to your product? And do you think that there is enough reception to this as well?
Absolutely. We truly believe that India is a jurisdiction ready to be embracing litigation funding. And that's for a range of reasons. There's the scope of the sophistication of the Indian dispute resolution market, which is really on the up. That means that well-capitalized claimants who perhaps wouldn't have thought about using funding as a tool are increasingly having conversations with us about how they can use funding to take the costs of claims off their balance sheets, turning claims which are often perceived to be liabilities into assets. They're using funding as a financing tool to aid cash flow and generate returns for their business, and that's a really interesting angle where we're seeing innovation, particularly in the Indian market, with leading corporates and institutions. On a more granular level, what we are finding particularly interesting in the Indian market when we're speaking to practitioners there is the access to justice angle that funding brings to the market. What funding enables is for impecunious claimants and claimants who may not necessarily have the deep pockets to bring claims to seek resolution of those claims which otherwise may have gone untouched and unrewarded without funding being in place. So what we're finding most interesting is the scope for funding right across the board in the Indian market and how quickly it's being embraced by practitioners and by claimants there.
And what has been the success rate of litigation funding overseas, wherever in developed markets this has been prevalent, Rosemary?
For me, the success rate of litigation funding has been eye-watering with its growth across the globe in the key dispute resolution centres over the last 5 years. I joined Vanin Capital nearly 5 years ago when litigation funding was really in its infancy throughout the world, except in Australia, where it was quite well established. And what's been extraordinary is the speed in which funding has been embraced in all of the key jurisdictions, in the UK, in America, in the Netherlands, in Australia, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and the steps that the legislature and the regulatory bodies have taken in those key jurisdictions to ensure that funding really ensures that its foothold in those markets is established and embraced. And what I am seeing across the globe is that funding is now changing the landscape. We're enabling claimants to be more innovative in the claims they're bringing, and we're really driving forward the use of technology and the use of innovative thinking in litigation, which without funders involved was lagging behind, but we're enabling law firms, clients and experts like the other teams here to really drive that forward.
All right, so I'll come to the technology bit that you mentioned briefly also, Rosemary, but I want to understand from Cyril a little more about this. Like Rosemary was mentioning about the access to justice. So no doubt that there is a huge demand for funding a long-haul judicial process. If many people had that liberty, then a lot more disputes may make it to the legal system. But on the other hand, do you think that it could be predatory also in nature, because the main purpose of these companies would be to extract their pound of flesh? So if there is an out-of-court settlement, is it going to be predatory, and how much of a control they could really exercise?
I think it comes down to the quality of the funder and the code of ethics that they follow. So some of the leading international funders like Van, and they have their own code of conduct and ethics. So, and they're the ones who eventually land up being more successful as well. But you raise an important point that, I mean, it could be misused as well. But the experience so far has been that it has actually helped the cause of access to justice, because a lot of good cases where there has been substantial injustice don't get to decision because they don't have the funds to fight it, or they don't have the resources to hire the right experts to fight these cases and get access to that. So overall, I think one of the big developments in the Indian economy is that we are moving from a relationship-based to a rule-based society, which means more focus on rights and their enforcement. So this is in line with that trend.
All right, Noah, you have been waiting by patiently. Now help us understand the use of technology even in innovative ways of dispute resolution like litigation funding, and overall how artificial intelligence is being used in similar such innovative products.
So artificial intelligence is being used in two core ways around disputes. The first is in e-discovery. People have to sort through massive piles of documents to find the relevant ones to a specific case. Second area where it's been big is in terms of making predictions. So that involves predicting which are the right pieces of research to focus on, but also how a given judge might rule or a given case might come out. And if you think about that, it ties really neatly to litigation funding, because through being able to more accurately model how a given case might come out, a funding company can make better judgments about where to invest its money.
Right, and also it may predict, probably through artificial intelligence, the predictability of the case and the winnability of the case as well.
Exactly.
That's what it does.
All right, so use of technology, very important. In fact, we'll slip into a short breather on Big Deal, but we'll come back and discuss more about how disruptive technology has been in the legal system and where are we when we look at India vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Stay tuned.